October 1907, New York City. A line forms outside the Knickerbocker Trust Company before the sun is fully up. By 9 in the morning, it wraps the block. By noon, the tellers have stopped counting money out loud because the sound of it, coins sliding across marble, drawers snapping open and shut, is making the crowd angrier. Men in wool coats grip passbooks like they're the only proof they ever had money at all. By 3 in the afternoon, the doors close, not for the day, for good. Textbooks will tell you this was a financial panic, a blip, a correction, the kind of thing that happens when banks overlend and depositors panic, and then, eventually, things go back to normal. They will not tell you what happened later that week in the private library at 23 Wall Street, where a small group of the country's most powerful bankers gathered, uninvited by any government, to decide, privately, behind a locked door, with no minutes taken, who would live and who would die. And they will almost never tell you that 4 decades later, some of the very men who passed through that world and the students of the system it built that week would go on to found the most powerful secret intelligence agency the world has ever seen. Everyone knows the story of how the CIA was born, Pearl Harbor, intelligence failures, a president determined that America would never again be caught blind. That is the official story, and it is not wrong. It is just not the beginning. The real beginning is a bank run, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why one of the CIA's earliest and longest-serving directors used to run a Wall Street law firm, and why that was never a coincidence. Here is the version of the story most people carry around in their heads. In 1947, 2 years after the end of the Second World War, Congress passes the National Security Act. It creates the Department of Defense, the National Security Council, and a new civilian intelligence body, the Central Intelligence Agency. The reasoning given is simple and on its face entirely reasonable. American intelligence had been scattered across competing military branches, uncoordinated, and effectively blind in the years leading up to Pearl Harbor. Never again would the United States be caught by surprise. It is a clean story. A war ends, a lesson is learned, an agency is born wrapped in the language of reform. But an agency does not appear out of nothing in 1947. It is built from people. And the people who built the CIA, its first directors, its recruiters, the lawyers who drafted its founding charter, the men who decided what covert action would even mean in practice, did not walk in from nowhere. They walked in from somewhere very specific, from the same handful of Wall Street law firms, investment banks, and private boardrooms that had spent the previous 4 decades quietly managing America's financial panics. This is the pattern this channel keeps circling back to, and it holds again here, maybe more clearly than anywhere else we've looked. When you follow the money far enough back, the people who end up running the instruments of national power are, disproportionately, the same people who already knew how to run the instruments of private power. Different building, same hands. The 1907 panic is where that private power was first tested at national scale, and where it discovered exactly how much authority it could wield without ever holding public office, without ever facing an election, and without anyone outside a handful of Madison Avenue addresses knowing the decisions were even being made. Keep one number in your head as we go, 70. That's how old J.P. Morgan was in 1907, when a private citizen effectively became the United States Emergency Central Bank for 6 days. We'll come back to what that number becomes, decades later, in a very different building. To understand why 1907 matters, you have to understand what the United States did not have in 1907, a central bank. The first and second banks of the United States had both been allowed to die decades earlier, killed off by presidents, first Madison's era, then Jackson's, who saw centralized financial power as a threat to democratic government. It was a defensible instinct. It also left a permanent hole. What existed instead, by the early 1900s, was a patchwork of thousands of independently chartered banks and trust companies, loosely connected through correspondent relationships, with no institution anywhere responsible for acting as a lender of last resort when panic struck. Trust companies were the weak point in that patchwork. Unlike national banks, they held smaller cash reserves relative to their deposits, because they were more lightly regulated and had grown explosively during the boom years before 1907, competing aggressively for deposits by offering higher returns and taking on riskier investments to fund them. When rumors spread that the Knickerbocker Trust, one of the largest trust companies in the country, with deposits in the tens of millions, had made reckless bets tied to a failed attempt to corner the copper market, depositors did not wait around to find out whether the rumors were true. They simply ran. Knickerbocker's collapse set off a chain reaction almost immediately. Other trusts, seen as exposed to the same risks or simply guilty by association, faced their own runs within days. The New York Stock Exchange came within hours of shutting down entirely as brokers ran out of cash to settle trades. Call money rates, the interest charged on short-term loans to brokers, spiked to levels that made ordinary trading functionally impossible. Banks across the country, sensing the contagion spreading, began restricting withdrawals of their own. For a period of days, the American financial system was, in every practical sense, frozen solid. There was no Federal Reserve to step in and inject liquidity. There was no Treasury mechanism built for exactly this scenario. There was, in the entire United States government, no playbook. There was only one man widely trusted enough, with enough personal capital and enough informal authority over every other major banker in the country, to act as a de facto central bank himself, John Pierpont Morgan. Morgan summoned the heads of the major trust companies and banks to his private library on Madison Avenue and, according to multiple first-hand accounts from that week, locked the door and would not let them leave until they agreed to jointly fund a rescue pool for the weakest institutions. Sitting at a card table with the country's most powerful financiers arranged around him, Morgan personally reviewed the ledgers of the failing trusts, decided in real time which ones were solvent enough to be worth saving and which would be allowed to collapse, and dictated the terms of the bailout himself, a private citizen making solvency decisions that today would sit squarely with the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve. Decided instead by one man's judgment inside a room with no government official present, the panic passed within about 2 weeks. The financial system stabilized. But the country did not forget how close it had come to total catastrophe, or how deeply uncomfortable it was that the entire rescue had depended on the personal judgment, personal wealth, and personal reputation of one 70-year-old financier and the tight network of institutions loyal to him. If Morgan had been unavailable, or unwilling, or simply older still, there was no institutional backstop at all. That discomfort, sitting in Congress for the next 6 years, eventually produced the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, a public institution explicitly built to make sure that no private citizen would ever again have to play central banker from his personal library. But here is the detail the textbook version leaves out. The men who designed the Federal Reserve System, who drafted its structure, and who advised Congress on how a central bank should actually function in practice, were drawn overwhelmingly from that same Wall Street network Morgan had assembled in his library in 1907, men like Paul Warburg, a partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company, who became one of the Federal Reserve's principal architects and one of its first governors. The public institution was new. The private relationships underneath it were not. The people who had learned firsthand how catastrophic it was for the country's financial stability to depend on one man's private judgment were, in large part, the very same people now writing the rules for its replacement. Fast forward roughly 3 decades, to the years surrounding the Second World War. America needed a real intelligence service almost from scratch. Unlike Britain, which had a century of institutional espionage tradecraft to draw on, or Germany, with its own long-established military intelligence apparatus, the United States had no standing equivalent at all, just a handful of small, competing, chronically underfunded military and diplomatic offices with no shared coordination. So in 1941, President Roosevelt turned to a man named William Wild Bill Donovan to build one from nothing, the Office of the Coordinator of Information, which soon became the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the direct wartime predecessor to the CIA. Donovan was, by training and career, a Wall Street corporate lawyer, a partner at a major New York firm with international clients and deep ties across the same financial establishment that had weathered 1907. And when Donovan needed to staff the OSS quickly with people who could be trusted with extraordinary secrecy, who had international business contacts, foreign language skills, and crucially, real experience quietly managing complex financial and legal problems under pressure and discretion, he did not go looking in the military first. He went looking in the same law firms and investment banks that had spent the prior generation managing the country's financial establishment. Allen Dulles is the clearest thread to pull here. Before the war, Dulles was a partner at Sullivan and Cromwell, one of the most powerful corporate law firms on Wall Street, a firm that had represented major American banks and multinational corporations with deep, ongoing financial ties across Europe, including extensive pre-war business relationships in Germany. Dulles joined the OSS, ran its Bern station in neutral Switzerland throughout the war, one of the most productive intelligence postings of the entire conflict, and after the CIA's creation in 1947, eventually rose to become its director in 1953, the longest-serving civilian head the agency has ever had. He was not an isolated case. The OSS drew so heavily and so consistently from elite legal and financial circles that insiders joked, only half-jokingly, that its initials really stood for "oh so social." Bankers, corporate lawyers, and Ivy League-connected financiers moved into intelligence roles in striking numbers because they already possessed exactly the skill set the work required: how to move money quietly across borders, how to read a balance sheet for what it wasn't showing, how to keep an enormous secret inside a boardroom without a single leak, and how to operate comfortably in rooms where the real decisions were never written down. When the OSS was formally dissolved after the war and its functions eventually folded into the newly created CIA in 1947, this same population of Wall Street-trained personnel did not disappear. They became the founding institutional memory of American intelligence, the people who trained the second generation, who shaped the agency's earliest tradecraft, and who decided, informally, who could be trusted with what. The financial network that had organized itself informally to survive 1907 and formally through the Federal Reserve after 1913 had, by 1947, quietly become the recruiting pool for America's peacetime Secret Service. Here is what most people miss about 1947. The National Security Act is remembered correctly as a response to Pearl Harbor. That is true as a matter of stated intent, but the practical challenge facing the drafters of the act was not, how do we prevent another surprise attack in the abstract? It was a much narrower and more difficult question. Who specifically is capable of running a permanent, competent, secretive intelligence organization for a country that has never had one, and doing it in a way trusted by the president, the military, and the country's economic establishment all at once? And the answer, again and again, in appointment after appointment, was the same men who had already proven, over the preceding 4 decades, that they could manage enormous, high-stakes, confidential operations without direct government oversight, because they had been doing exactly that for the financial system since 1907. Allen Dulles did not simply happen to end up running the CIA. He was part of a small, interlocking network of Wall Street lawyers and financiers, many with prior OSS service, many from the same handful of firms, who helped shape the CIA's early structure, culture, and operating philosophy from the inside. The agency's DNA, from its earliest days, carried the instincts of the boardroom rather than the barracks. Compartmentalized information shared strictly on a need-to-know basis, plausible deniability built into the chain of command, and major decisions made quietly by a trusted inner circle rather than through any open, accountable process. The National Security Act created the legal shell. The Wall Street to OSS pipeline filled that shell with people who already knew, instinctively, how to operate inside exactly that kind of structure, because it was, in essence, the same structure they'd been operating inside since long before the war. The pattern did not end in 1947. For decades afterward, the revolving door between Wall Street, corporate law, and American intelligence and foreign policy leadership continued to turn in both directions. Financiers and corporate lawyers moved into senior government roles at the CIA, the State Department, and the National Security Council. Government officials, in turn, moved back into finance and law, carrying relationships, assumptions, and institutional habits with them each time. It is a pattern this channel has traced before, in other episodes, in central banking, in wartime finance, in the architecture of institutions that present themselves as serving the public, but are staffed, disproportionately, from a small and familiar circle that already trusts itself. The lesson here is not that some conspiracy built the CIA in a back room over a period of years. The evidence doesn't support that, and it isn't the honest version of the story. The lesson is something quieter and in some ways more unsettling, that in moments of genuine national crisis, a bank panic in 1907, a global war in the 1940s, the United States has repeatedly reached for the same trusted private network to do the work its public institutions were not yet equipped to do. And once that network is inside the institution, wearing a government title instead of a bank letterhead, it very rarely fully leaves. J.P. Morgan closed his library doors in October of 1907 and decided, alone, which banks would survive the week. 4 decades later, men trained in that exact same world, the same firms, the same instincts, the same comfort with secrecy, decided how America would gather its secrets for the rest of the century. The ledger and the intelligence file, it turns out, were kept by the same hands. So the next time you hear the official, clean version of how a major institution was born, ask a slightly different question than the textbook wants you to ask. Don't ask what event caused it. Ask who was already in the room, managing something else entirely, before the cameras and the congressional hearings ever arrived. More often than history likes to admit, you will find a banker. If you had to guess, which agency or institution do you think has a similar hidden financial origin story? Drop your guess in the comments below. We might make it the next episode.